single piece of wood underneath, not ball bearing, no electronic. Just this piece of wood. This is very hardest wood, acacia wood. This wheel rotate on a single piece of wood underneath, not ball bearing, no electronic. Just this piece of wood. This is very hardest wood, acacia wood. We are working all generation last 1,000 years. Generation to generation.
Wow.
This work is depend this father to son.
So your father and grandfather
Yeah,
did
did
this
the
too.
same.
Wow.
New generation also did the same. Some are educated. They will go to big cities. Found any job. They will not found any job. They came here and this professional job.
Wow.
Now, if you understood everything that guy just said, I thought it was in Hindi, his native language there for a minute, and then, nope, it's English. That's what it was. It's not important, all the things that he said or didn't say in that video, but what I wanted you to see was a very ancient way of making pottery. His father and his grandfather before him did it, and he didn't use the words centrifugal force, but a centrifuge, we know, spins things at a rapid pace and sends things out, and that is an ancient way of doing it. That little piece of wood that he pointed to his left there just off the screen is just a point, but it's made out of acacia, which is a very hard wood, and that is a heavy wheel that spins. And so now we have different versions of that. It evolved over history. They had the ones where they kicked the foot. Have you ever done any pottery? Anybody? What do they call it? The potter's wheel. And they say throwing pottery, which I always thought was weird, because if you throw pottery, that's bad. Mom said don't do that because it breaks. Throwing it, putting that piece of clay on there, this is an ancient thing. And we have examples going back a long time, thousands and thousands of years for this. This guy is pretty good at what he does, and I watched several different videos. I just wanted a short clip to show you kind of how this worked. I tried my hand at pottery without a potter's wheel in high school, and it just didn't work out. Was it a dog? Was it a giraffe? Nobody really knew. It just drooped. But when you've got someone that knows what they're doing, when they're intimately familiar with the equipment and with the clay, something beautiful and something useful can come out of that. So we're in this series, and this is the next to the last. There is an end in sight. So for those of you who have hated this series, congratulations, it's almost over. Those who have loved it, I'm sorry. It's almost over. I've really enjoyed this series in Jeremiah. I spend predominantly more time in the New Testament, as you guys know. My facility with that language set and all that is greater than with Hebrew, but the tools that we have allow us to do a lot of different things and discover what they said and what they meant. So this guy for 40 years, as a young man, 20-ish, God calls him into service, and he says, you're going to have to go and speak some very hard truths to people that believe that they're just like this with me. God says this. You're going to have to go and tell people who think that everything's fine, nothing to see here, that everything is not fine, and there's lots and lots of things to see, and lots of things that God wants changed. You can imagine that Jeremiah was not real popular. Jeremiah was thrown in prison. Have you read through? Some of you read through Jeremiah. It's 52 chapters, so good for you if you read the whole thing and, in one setting like a good Christian would do. No. I hope you've spent some time in it, because that tells you things about what happened to this guy. He's told you're going to be hated for what you say. I'm going to have to make your face as hard as iron because these people are not going to like you because of what you say. As a matter of fact, there are many, many prophets, all of them, many, many priests that will serve in my name that will say, everything's fine, peace, when there is no peace. Nothing to see here. And you have to go and tell them that they've been wicked and adulterous and not followed my ways, and I love them. I want better for them. So they need to change how they are constantly. That theme of you need to repent is in the book of Jeremiah. They ban him from the temple. God's prophet. You're not welcome here. Here's the picture of the guy, not that. But they watched at the back, and they wouldn't let him in. For a period of years, they wouldn't let him in. Another time he goes, and he sends someone to read these prophecies from God that he's been delivering to the people, to the king of Judah at the time, in Jerusalem, in the temple. The king has pieces of it torn off as it's read and thrown into the fire. Why? I reject it. I reject that message. God wouldn't treat us that way. He wouldn't allow these bad things to happen to us. But he did, and he does, because the depth of God's emotion and the depth of his commitment to his people showed them, or should have showed them, it certainly showed Jeremiah, and it's been showing me how much he loves his people and wants best, what's good, and what's right for us. So, he uses common things. God uses everyday things, and he did with Jeremiah, and so he tells him one day, this is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Go down to the potter's house, and there I will give you my message. And you're not going to get it until you get there. So you need to go. So he did. And it says, I went down to the potter's house. Well, we could talk about clay till we're blue in the face, but it collects along the banks of rivers. There's a lot of clay because it's fine, it's sediment, it filters down. So the potter's house would be down where you could find clay. And in many cultures, that's where it is. It's close to the river where you could go down and get the product. So I went down to the potter's house, and I saw him working at the wheel. And we can find all kinds of examples for, well, you tell me, and we'll see how your antiquities are. What were the different vessels made from clay? What were the different things made from clay? Not just vessels, but what kind? A hint, a cup, dishes, bricks, what? Yeah, vats to hold things in. Everything we can imagine that, Levi says pretty much everything. Anything you can imagine that is made of plastic now that we have, or glass, was made from earth. This thing that you dug out of the ground with your hands, and you took and you fashioned it into something else. And they made all sorts of things with it. There are still existing structures. Adobe, you put some stuff with that, and some of these things still stand. Bricks, there's some iron, and there's some other things. There's some organic materials and really finely grained dirt, and it all mixes together to form something very hard when the water is taken out of that. Sometimes it's sun-dried, and if it's sun-dried, did you know this? That's why my giraffe/dog kind of drooped, because I didn't fire kiln it. I didn't put it in the fire, and so it still had some water content in it. Eventually it got hard and the nose fell off, and things happened with my animal. But if you put that back in water for a week or two, you can make something completely different out of it. If you fire kiln it, then it becomes hard and brittle, and you've got the Ming vase that, the panda knocks off in Kung Fu Panda. Did you see Kung Fu Panda? Well, he knocked off a priceless vase, and it was made of pottery. When you fire it like that, it becomes slick and glazed on the outside, and it becomes brittle. So, this continues, this passage. But the pot that he was shaping from the clay was marred in his hands. So the potter formed it into another pot, shaping it as it seemed best to him. Did you see how fast that happened with that guy with just that plain, wheel? If you put a little pressure here, a little pressure there, a little water, you know what you're doing, things happen. And beautiful things can be made, things that are useful. But this was up to the potter as he did it. It's moldable. It changes from a lump into something that people can actually use. The potter knows the material that he works with. And if you've watched any of these, they're on YouTube. He understands the water. He understands the spin. He understands just the right squeeze. And you can make all sorts of things, beautiful things and wonderful things. But you have to know what you're doing. So he continues, and this is the point. Jeremiah is there, and God is impressing on him that this everyday thing, these things you see in every household, these things you saw in the temple, you saw vendors along the street, you go down by the river and you see the potters making these things. Then the word of the Lord came to me and he said, God says to Israel, can I not do with you, Israel, as this potter does, declares the Lord? Like clay in the hand of the potter, so are you in my hand, Israel. Jeremiah has been warning. He has been pleading. He has been begging. He has been railing against the sins of Israel. And broadly speaking, we said there were two sins, idolatry and adultery. Adultery because God views this relationship as an intimate husband and wife thing. He said, I'm your husband. I called you as a virgin bride. I called you to be mine. I called you to be in relationship with me. And you're running after these other things. You're running after these things that can't satisfy. He called it broken cisterns, something made out of clay or a vat that eventually would break, dry in the sun, and hold water that was brackish and no good when God says, I'm the real thing. I'm the real living water that you're supposed to take in, but you'd rather have that than you would me. And God, he doesn't, but he tries to wrap his mind around that. And he says several times in the book of Jeremiah, who has ever heard of such a thing? Who has ever heard of such a thing as a nation rejecting its God? And he's using small g, but you don't just change midstream. Look at our history together. It's as if a husband and a wife are on the verge of divorce, and that's exactly what God says to his people in Jeremiah. Are we really going to throw all this away? Are we really going to throw away this thing that we have and that we have had for so long? Some of you have been through the pain of that. You've had this discussion with another person. The God of the universe says that to his people because he loves and he cares and he's invested. He was invested in them and he's invested in us. The prophets of Israel, as I said, would lie. And God kind of pokes a little fun at them through Jeremiah. They come to the people, and God says that these false prophets say, I had a dream, I had a dream. Not like Martin Luther had a dream. This is just making it up on your own. And they go on their own steam. They say things from their own imagination, he says. This is right out of the text in Jeremiah. They don't stand before me, God says. They don't ask what I want to be shared like you do, Jeremiah. They just speak from their own mind and their own heart and their own creativity and their own will, and they don't listen. And God desperately wanted their attention. They said things like, you're safe. Israel was a prosperous place, and Judah was a prosperous place. And that wasn't going to change. It's just going to get better and better and better every day. That's what they told the people. And Jeremiah was a lone voice. He had a few other friends crying in the wilderness and saying, you need to pay attention because we've slipped and we've fallen from where we were. Now, God has the authority and the creativity to shape people who enter into covenant with him. That's them then, and that's us now. He has the creativity, and he has the authority to shape people who have entered into covenant with him. If we've done that, a covenant is that agreement. It's a relationship, but it's an agreement. Here's my end, and here's your end. There's a word used in the Bible. It's all over the place. Righteous and righteousness. And it says, God says to his people, you're supposed to be holy or righteous because I am righteous and holy. Well, okay, we know that, and I'm not God, so am I done? There is a part of the word righteous that means I keep my end of the covenant. And God says that to Jeremiah, and he says that to the people. I've always kept my end of the bargain. I called you out of Egypt. I called you to be a people for me. I gave you these rules and regulations to structure your life and to structure your society because they are good for you. Not because I'm trying to restrict you or hold you in, but because I love you and I want you to enjoy life. And yet, you're not keeping your end of the bargain. But God has the authority to shape people who enter into covenant with him. The real question for us, with people, God's dealing with a living, breathing, a living, breathing human being. Self-determinative. You can make a choice and go with it. Rebellious sometimes. Compliant sometimes. Thoughtful. Sometimes not thoughtful. Sometimes we do things in a rash way, but he's dealing with a living human person. Not just taking an inanimate thing like clay, but now using that as an illustration for our minds and our hearts and the deepest part of who we are. And that's what he wants. He wants me at the deepest level. The real question here, the pull or the draw for us, has always been, since Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, who is in charge? Who is running my life? Adam and Eve, Satan said, I want to be in charge of my life. I will take the consequences for that. And he's thrust from the presence of God, and many of the angels thought that was a great idea, and they went with him. That's who we know in the New Testament as demons. The question for you is now, and always has been and will be, who is going to run your life? Who's going to be in charge of your life? Becoming a believer in God is saying that I think he knows better than I do about what I should do and how I should speak and what I should think. He knows better than I do about the things I should do and what my priorities should be, and he should shape those, not me. And that's being submissive, and that's wanting to be on the potter's wheel. God loves us, and he loved them, and he keeps his end of the bargain. He always has, and he always will. He's got the authority and the creativity to do it because he can make willing people useful and beautiful. I have seen some giants of the faith that were about 5 feet tall. People who, older ladies who pray. Other people will say, I'll pray for you. And do you ever have somebody say, hey, I'll pray for you? And you kind of go, well, okay, maybe you will and maybe you won't. It's a nice thought. I've had that, and I'm sure you have too. Well-meaning people who mean it when they say it, but then maybe they don't follow through. Some do. Well, in this case, God can make people into beautiful things, but we have to be willing for that. The process of being made into the image of Jesus often does not tickle. Have you ever had a process? I had a dental implant. I've got it in here. It's a little black cap. It's metal and it's round, and they took I wish I hadn't looked. I told some of you, I wish I had not looked. I took my glasses off and I set them off to the side when the oral surgeon started his work because I didn't want to know. At the end, I thought, well, I've had the shots and the other stuff, so I just took a little peek on the thing, and I saw drill bits. I mean, about this big. It'd be what you got in your garage. I mean, except they're, sterilized, and I'm sure they're sharper, I hope. I asked him, is this like wood where you drill a pilot hole and then a little bigger hole? Yes, that's exactly what it was. And it was just a drill. That's all it was, just at a slower speed. And, he had a mask on. It looked very professional and official. Things turned out okay, but it did not tickle, is my point. In order to make this better, in order to fix this, it was painful. In order for God to fix some of the flaws and some of the stones and some of the pieces of grass and dirt in my soul that keep me from being smooth and useful and beautiful, God's going to have to do some painful things in my life. Humans will do anything to avoid pain. We'll spend our last dollar trying to avoid pain, any kind of pain, emotional pain. People turn to chemicals. They turn to workaholism. They turn to all sorts of things to avoid the pain. To avoid the person that causes the pain, they will avoid the person. We do this in a number of different ways. We'll spend our last dollar to try to avoid physical pain. And yet, if I read the Bible correctly, this is going to be a somewhat painful process. Totally worth doing. What process? The process of God making me as much like Jesus as possible, whatever it takes and forever long, however long it takes. Does that mean that I might experience periods of want and need because he wants to build dependence on me, inside me? Probably. Does it mean that my pride will come under the spotlight and God shows me that, hey, you're thinking way too much of yourself in this equation? Yes? Point is, it's a painful process. It's not going to tickle when God puts us up there and spins us around and around and makes what he wants to make from our lives. The potter knows what he's doing. We can trust him with this. He understands. The Bible calls this beauty from ashes, restoration and healing, joy in the morning after a hard night where you haven't slept or you've been up with someone sick. The Bible calls this all kinds of things. Faith in God is not a self-help program. This is God stepping into history and sacrificing his very self, as Tam told us, to help us. I can't help myself here. You cannot remove the cosmic debt of sin that you have. Nothing you will ever do will let you do that. But Jesus says, I will do it for them. I will do it for Tony. I'll do it for Mark. I'll do it for Val. I'll do it for George. I'll do it for every one of us. But it requires something of us, just sacrifice. The work is not where we think it is. The work is not trying harder to do better or do more or be good or not be bad. That's not where the work is. The work is in you surrendering yourself to Jesus. The work is in me giving up my will and my rights and saying, do with me whatever you will. That's a scary thing, isn't it? For people in our culture, in our day, that know what they're doing, we can think our way out, buy our way out, logic our way out of lots of things. The work is not where you think it is, not where I thought it was for a long time. The work is somewhere else, and it's giving up, and it's answering that question, who is running my life? So, if there's any problems at the wheel, it's not going to be with the potter. It'll be with the clay. If there are problems at the wheel, it's going to be here, pointing at me. Not with the potter, because he knows what he's doing. He's made other people into beautiful things. He uses funny examples, doesn't he? He uses a widow that has 2 small copper coins as an example of generous giving. Does that make any sense at all? This woman that they kind of patted on the back and said, hey, I'm nice to see you. But 2 small copper coins, really? That's it? Okay, I'm really glad you're here. Jesus says, did you see that? She put in more than all of the rest. This woman that people overlooked. Because she was willing to be shaped. And that was all she had to live on. That's what Jesus said. That's trust. That's one of the things that's required of us when we think about ourselves as clay. What kinds of things got in the way of ancient Israel and Judah? Complacency, pride, self-will, self-sufficiency. What? The idolatry. The places where they put their ultimate trust in things that were not ultimate. That's what it is, self-sufficiency. You run after these other gods. Why? In part because Egypt had those gods, and Egypt will protect us. Egypt is our military and political ally. We need some grain, we call on Egypt, the breadbasket of the world. Little Egypt, that's where I'm from. Little Egypt, when there was grain lacking in lots of other places, in southern Illinois, and back in the day, they had grain. So we were known as Little Egypt. Why? Because you grew it, and you stored it, and you could sell it. You could give it away. We'll put our hope there. Egypt will save us. Well, when the time came, Egypt didn't. And Babylon came, and Babylon did what they would do. And God let it happen. We're going to talk about that some next week, God's justice and God's love. They put ultimate trust in places that they should not have. Now, for us, this believing in Jesus has to be a continuous and a voluntary subordination of my will to his will. What do I mean by that? Every day. We have a tendency in churches to think that it's I came down forward in 87 and I prayed a prayer and or was baptized into Jesus, and now me and Jesus are like this. What I'm suggesting is that is one way of seeing it. Dave and Vicki know I'm a little sarcastic, and I probably shouldn't be. My point, regularly we have to return back and back and back again to this primary commitment. Or what? Or it will slip. You will slip. I will slip. And I'll get into a groove, and I'll think I'm doing just fine, just like Judah did, just like Israel did. This book is super relevant. You think the prophets are old and dusty and whatever. These guys were revolutionary, and Jesus quotes them. Jesus will quote Isaiah just in the course of conversation. Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you, and he's pointing to the people in Jesus' day. And then he would quote part of Isaiah. He identified with these firebrand prophets. That's important. If the God of the universe wants me to hear it so badly that he told them back then, and then he tells them again through Jesus. I've got to return to this primary commitment again and again and again. Now, there's going to be internal forces and external forces that will fight that process in you. Your internal desire to do what you want to do in the way that you want to do it, the ways that you think, is going to be a problem. And you will have a culture that will say, whatever you want, honey, that's fine. Whatever you want, anytime you want it, as quick as you want it, get it. So you're going to have the fight. So we need this. We need each other desperately. When you come to Jesus, you have a family. You have brothers and sisters. That's how God describes it. A family that you can rely on, that you can look to and say, I'm going through hell. I'm going through a hard time. And people come alongside and pray. Or they come to you and pray. Or they come alongside and help you with what you need help with. Or they acknowledge that, yeah, I'm just here. I'll be here for you in any way I can. You have something that people on the outside don't have, but we want them to have it. This isn't something we just want to keep here. We want everybody to know this. But in order for that to happen, I've got to get up on the wheel, and I've got to let God do what he wants to do. We need each other. We need encouragement and strength, doing life with each other. Romans, Paul says, rejoice with those who rejoice in the body and weep with those who weep. Be there throughout this and everything in between. And that's what he says. How do you demonstrate that you are moldable, malleable? Is shapeable a word? I put it in brackets in case it wasn't. Then it's on me. How do you demonstrate that? At first that slide said, are you moldable and malleable and shapeable? And pretty much people would say, well, yeah. Next question. How do you demonstrate that? How are you when somebody confronts you about something that you know you probably ought to be confronted about anyway, but you just rather they didn't? Rigid, brittle, been put in the fire, and the sheen has come on that piece of pottery, and I'd really just rather not, because I feel kind of good and look kind of good. I'm useful and beautiful, aren't I? God's doing something. He wants to do something with you, with your heart, mind, heart. He wants to do something with me. But I got to be willing to get up on the wheel. And there's so many things that fight against that. And I just have to be aware of those things. And then I got to tell you, and I say this a lot, you help me and I'll help you. I mean that. That's not just something to say toward the end of a sermon. We're not there yet. We're getting there. We're getting there. We're making better progress than you think. And I wasn't done talking about that one. I wanted to ask one other thing. This is going to require introspection. Introspection is what? Looking inward, looking inside. It's going to require introspection. And sometimes that's difficult because, frankly, there have been times in my life where before Tam even finished the sentence, I knew where it was going. I already knew, but I'd just rather not. Do we have to, really? There's other times where it kind of came out of the blue, where I'm on the wheel, I think everything's going swimmingly, and then there's a rock, and there's a giant divot where the potter has to just kind of mush everything back together again, pull that rock out, and start again. But he wants to start on me again. Can I not do with Israel, with you, with me, what I want to do, God says? And the rhetorical answer is yes. Yes, he can, but I have to be willing for this. What kinds of things keep you from climbing up onto the potter's wheel? I think that's a legitimate question. It was for me. I strongly suspect that my reasons and your reasons are not going to be that different from Judah's, the original recipients of the message of Jeremiah. The strong temptation to put my trust in a political system. The strong desire to put my trust in a 401k. That you saw it, I mean, some of you invested in that, you saw it, and then just down. Most of the gains of 2018 are gone. And you've been told probably by your financial advisor, it's a long game, just don't get nervous. But there are people who do put their ultimate trust in things that are not ultimate. Maybe you put your trust in another person. Maybe you put the kind of trust there that only belongs to God in another person that's going to fix you or help you or complete you. And maybe that was misplaced trust. Maybe they let you down. Maybe they hurt you. Maybe they lied to you. Maybe they spoke badly about you. God can heal and fix, and he wants to heal and fix. But he's got to get me on the wheel. So these things that are in Jeremiah, it would just be foolish for us to overlook them. You need to spend time in there. And Isaiah, I read Isaiah and I go, yes, I see that. I felt that. I've been that. God knows what he's doing with putting his word together. We have to identify our false gods, and we have to identify our broken cisterns, the places where I put that trust that is just leaking out. And then transfer that to what belongs to God. So, what kind of clay is the potter looking to work with? What is he looking for from you and from me? Break down the word compliant for me. What is one word that's inside the word compliant? Comply. And, okay, that's correct. Just keeping me honest, Levi, thank you. To comply, to be pliant, pliable, like Play-Doh. You ever play with Play-Doh as a kid? Or your sister played with Play-Doh, maybe you destroyed everything she ever tried to make that was beautiful? Just ask it. Moldable. What kind of clay is God looking for? I think he's looking for clay that is trusting and compliant, that is loving, that is willing. That's what he wants from my mind. He wants me to be willing, not complacent. He wants me to be obedient. He wants me to obey him because Someone said, I'd tell you who if I could remember, it wasn't me, but I'll say it again because it's really good. Trust and love for God go together. You can't say I trust God and not feel a great love for him. And you can't say I love God without really trusting him. Those two things go hand in hand. That's important for me to remember. But the kind of clay that he's looking for, I think God wants me to say this: help me to willingly place myself in your hands. I believe that you know what you're doing with me. I think you know what you're doing with me, and I trust you. Even if I don't understand. Because you will face times of fear. You'll be afraid of what God's doing. Yes, it feels kind of right, but I'm scared to death because I don't know where this is going to end. Where's this going to take me if I keep acting like this? The New Testament will shoot you straight. It took Jesus to a cross, the sacrifice that he made. It will take us, I think, sacrificing and giving ourselves of our time, money, who I am. I've only got so much of me, but there are people that have needs. And so there's people around you that have needs that will need you to be there. I'll tell you what it probably won't mean. It will probably not be constantly questioning what God is doing. What are you doing, God? We'd never say that out loud. Really, God, come on. What are you doing? And I know it's cliche in a sermon, but I still think it's accurate. You pray for patience. God, help me be a more patient person. What's going to happen? Don't do it. Don't do it unless you are okay. What, Felicia? He will give you the circumstances to build patience. That is a really pleasant way of saying that it's about to get real. It's about to get real. What? Yeah, wisdom. That's wisdom. That's right. If we do that, if we pray, God, help me be a more loving person, you probably are going to face some unloving people that don't really think that much of you. If you pray, God, help me be a more giving person, well, guess what? You might be asked to sacrifice something. I know this because finally, thank God, after years and years of thinking I was doing things and whatever, I'm finally starting to get a clue about what some of this might be about. And I'm thrilled with what I find. I'm filled with joy about what I find. I'm scared about what I find. But I know as a piece of clay, I can't be constantly saying, God, I don't think that's the best thing, or I'd rather do it this way. I know that I can't do that. Here's a helpful exercise. Imagine yourself on the wheel. What would it be like? And I'm not going to do the preacher thing where everybody close your eyes and imagine yourself a piece of clay. But at some point, it would be a helpful exercise for you when you're by yourself, reading Jeremiah, and you get to chapter 18, and it says, go down to the potter's house and look at this, and can I not do with Israel and you with what I want to do? Because I'm the potter, God says. I own you. I love you. And I want good for you. And I want to make you into something useful and beautiful. Imagine yourself as the clay, spinning around and around. Did you see that guy? Did you happen to notice when he had that stick and he started it, but then he was spinning and he took the stick off and he's talking to it sounded like a tourist thing is what it sounded like. Oh yeah, yes, well, they're watching him make the thing. I think that's what it was. And they probably bought that pot at an exorbitant price, which was just fine. They had it to give, and it was great. But he does this because he gets in again, and the force in his arms and in his torso goes into that stick, and that stick goes into that little notch in the rock, and then he puts the energy into that rock, and then centrifugal force keeps that thing spinning. It might make you dizzy sometimes what God's doing. It might make you dizzy because you'll feel things. You'll feel like God, you maybe lead me too high. The air's thin up here. I've never been here before. I haven't given like this before. I haven't sacrificed like this before. I haven't opened up myself to you like this before. And it'll feel a little disconcerting and a little weird. It's part of being the clay, and that's what we are, and he is the potter. So, as we're winding down, but we have this treasure in jars of clay. Why? To show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. God should get the applause when I am loving, joyful, peaceful, patient, kind. When you refrain, when you hold back from, when someone curses you, not like maybe literally curses you, but when they say bad things, if you withhold, you don't exercise your God-given right to get back in their face and to whatever and escalate things, when you withhold, God should get the credit for that if you're a believer. You get partial credit because you're willing for God to do that, but he should get the credit because he made the pot, and he's making the pot. I want to understand this. We have this treasure in jars of clay. What treasure? New life. A changed life. Forgiveness from a cosmic debt you couldn't pay. Kind of a big deal. Joy and a new purpose and a new family. Walking in a different way that says, yes, I know that I'm a sinner. Now, God, you know that I'm a sinner. And thank you, Jesus, for dying for me to take care of those sins. Thank you. Not perfect, but I want to be on that wheel. I want you to shape me, and I want you to mold me. He sees that. He responds to that. God is dipping his hands in that water, and he wants to change us and make us into something. The rest of that passage says, we always carry around in our body the death of Jesus so that the life of Jesus may be revealed in our body. As you go around and as you speak and talk, Jesus ought to come out of that, spill out of that life. For we who are alive are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake. Killing my desire to get back, yes. Killing my desire to speak when I desperately want to speak, but it would be better if I didn't, yes. Not having to constantly defend everything that I do and say so that you'll think great things, yes. God gets the credit because he's making the pot. People should be able to look at you and see Jesus if you say you're a believer. They should be able to look at me and they should see Jesus. Maybe not, maybe like that guy that saw people like sticks, trees walking around. Maybe not perfectly, but sometimes they ought to say, you know what? I think that person means it. I think she means it. I like that. When the jars of clay, remember they are jars of clay, the treasure within gets all the glory, which seems somehow more fitting. Jen Hatmaker. That seems right than for us to take all the credit for what God does. I like that quote. When we live like this, and we do give God credit, it gives other people hope that God could do that for them too. Because frankly, I think that sometimes Christians put off the idea that we've got it all together and we're fine. What's wrong with you? If you would come here, for a little while, then you could figure it out and be like us. When in fact, we're told to go to them. So as we are going, as we heard last week from Paul, as we are going, we share this. God, not me, should get the applause when I get it right. And that gives other people hope. That's part of sharing the good news. All right, we are wrapping down. Winding down? Wrapping up. Wrapping up, winding down. Where does God find you today? Where has the river of your life taken you? As the potter, as God walks down to the bank and he sticks his hand in there to gather up you, where has life taken you? You've been hurt? Things happen. You've been through a long period of a dry spell with God.